Hey, so Jesse, we talk a lot about college on this show.
Yeah, we do. And what we actually mean is Avondale University College, where we both got our bachelor degrees in ministry and theology.
Yeah, and that's also where we became buddies and we lived in the dorms, we ate at the caf, walked to class in the sunshine. It was great.
It was great. We had late night Macca's runs, we led in worship, and we also met some of our closest friends there.
Absolutely. Probably one too many late night Macca's runs for me. But, honestly, studying at Avondale was the best. And we're so stoked to say that this episode is sponsored by Avondale University College.
Called to make a difference?
Called to beat Avondale. Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Josh.
And this is all about saving the best and burning the rest.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. Ready.
I don't know why I did that.
I don't know. Once you did it, it was a bit contagious. I couldn't help myself.
Man, oh man. How are you, Josh?
I'm all right. Big news, everyone. But next year, there's a bit of a change going on for Burn the Haystack. And me. Yeah. So I should say the two are actually kind of unrelated, funnily enough, but now they are sort of related because they've both happened.
Do you want to quickly, let's talk about what we've been talking about with the podcast and the rest of the team, because that came first, and then you have some news that you want to share as well.
Yeah. So kind of, I don't know, a few months ago now, I think it was. Yeah, it was a while ago. Maybe not a few months, at least a couple of months. Jesse and I were sort of chatting and viewing the podcast, trajectory and how everything's been going. And it's been pretty full on for us. Like, we've been doing this for about 3 years now.
Yeah.
And people probably don't realize how much work goes into making a podcast, like a weekly podcast. We don't just sit down and chat. Well, sometimes we have just sat down and chatted with very little prep.
And
but
desperately hope that people don't notice.
No, but most of the time, there's a fair bit of prep work that goes into each episode. There's connecting with people after each episode, all that kind of thing. And and so we just thought, you know what? 2020 particularly has been a very draining year. I'm sure a lot of people can understand, just with church stuff as well as podcast stuff. So we decided in 2021, we're going to take a bit of a hiatus with the podcast. Just a bit of a break, a bit of a slow down.
And to be clear, hiatus, people sometimes think of hiatus and go, oh, it just means they're cancelling or whatever. To be clear, a hiatus means that we do hope to be back one day, and we do hope we're not cancelling all activities. We are definitely wanting to continue at some point. We just don't know when that some point is. And
I don't know if we're going to commit again to a weekly schedule or not.
Weekly it's been pretty intense. Yeah. That's sort of the big thing. I mean, maybe we'll even just come back with a random episode here and there. I don't know. We're not sure. If we really feel like there's something we need to say at the time, we'll just jump back. I'm sure. Yeah. But this is about, I guess, us communicating expectations so that all of you beautiful people really, so you understand what the expectation is. We're not going to say we're going to be back in March or April or June. We might be back before then. We might be back after then. We don't know at this point. Originally, the idea was that we were going to have some other projects that we were going to work on together, and that was going to be really, really interesting. And we were really excited about that. And some of those things might come to fruition, but something else cropped up in the middle of that, which is going to affect us. It doesn't affect me as much, but it affects Josh a lot.
A bit, at least a bit.
At least a small amount.
No, I'm actually moving, but moving back to Australia. So, being a pastor and a chaplain in Sydney, which will be pretty cool. Really sad to leave New Zealand, but yeah, I really loved it here. But obviously, the change in, like, it's a total change in pace for me, whole different setting and everything. So, and the different time zones. It's only 2 hours apart, but 3 hours apart for a couple of weeks a year. But
sure, yeah, but it's going to be,
honestly, like, you'd be surprised how big difference, especially if you're trying to do something weekly, like how big a difference a 2 hour time difference can make.
And your workload is going to change fairly significantly. You're going to be in a brand new church, brand new school, which you haven't been in a school for the last 3 years, something like that. So that's going to be a big change, and it's going to be quite different, and it's going to be exciting and crazy. And because you've been in New Zealand the same amount of time as I have, 5 years. So this place has kind of become our home.
Yeah, absolutely has.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's a big change for the podcast because we've always been a New Zealand-based podcast, but now we're going to be a international. Well, I guess now 3 out of the 4 members who help with the podcast are in Australia now. So you're overruled, Jesse.
Yeah, it's true. When in doubt, go the Aussie route. I mean, we're all Australians. I do find that quite hilarious. Though we are both Aussies, we have been based in New Zealand the entirety of this podcast's life, and when you're doing a weekly podcast, especially, you're always stressing out and thinking in the back of your mind about what's coming up next, because it's this constant ongoing thing.
True. And like trying to tee up interviews with people and thinking about it, like, what am I going to ask them? You're kind of like deliberately reading books and looking into things that you might not necessarily be. So it does take up quite a lot of like mental space too. Yeah.
And I think even when we've been on this seasonal schedule, I don't know about you, Josh, but like having a month off at the beginning of the year and then at the middle of the year is cool, but it's still a month where you're thinking about what's going to come next in the next season, because that's that takes up a lot of headspace even when you have those big 4 weeks off.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, those are the big announcements. I don't know what else to say about it, but I guess we'll keep in contact on like social media and that kind of thing, and you'll know. And stay subscribed, because then you'll see if we do, I don't know, whenever we do next drop an episode, it'll just show up. It'll be like a Christmas has come early or late. I don't know.
Yeah.
A special day has arrived because of the Haystack episode. So anyway, but we're it'll be nice to have a bit of a break for a bit.
Yeah. And so thank you guys. I know this is probably disappointing and a little bit sad for a lot of you. It definitely is for us, but again, it's not the end. It's just the beginning. No, I don't know. It's definitely a hit pause in expectation for whatever the next chapter is for Burn the Haystack, and I'm excited for whatever the next chapter is for us. And Josh and I don't really exactly know what that's going to be. No. So we're all in the same boat together. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But anyway, we got some things we got to talk about today. We got an episode to do. We got places to be. There's been a big issue, so let's talk about it.
Oh man!
Yeah. Got it.
Lend us your ears and we will jump into it today. The pun train has left the station.
No, okay.
This is cool. Now this is kind of going to be like a classic Burn the Haystack episode. We've done a lot of interviews recently, so it feels nice to jump back into a you and me just just chatting about something and being a little bit goofy. So it's kind of sad, but it's also this episode for me it's like a deja vu episode. It's like we've been here before, because we have been here before. We've talked about pastors who have stuffed up and who have jumped out of ministry. This feels like the third or fourth episode we've done on this topic.
That's true, actually, yeah, because we did one on Bill Hybels.
Yep.
We did another one on Marty Sampson. Or was that in the same episode? No, that was a different episode.
We did
Marty
one
Sampson when he left.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, Marty Sampson and Joshua Harris.
the guy who wrote Kiss Dating Goodbye?
Kiss Dating Goodbye. That's right.
I think we did Marty and Joshua in the same episode, or they may have been split. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, a while ago.
So, it is a deja vu episode, isn't it?
Yeah, but this one's a bit different, I think. Like, the reasons are different than what we've talked about before, and it's a bit of a different, I guess some different issues than what we've covered that are happening in church, particularly in the US church. So not hating on the US, but these issues seem to be much more prevalent in the churches over there than definitely New Zealand. But
and I think as well, the interesting thing about this episode is it's a lot more close to home for at least one of us. I don't really know Carl Lentz from a bar of soap. I've only seen him preach online. But you have much more of a deep connection with Carl, which sounds a little bit weird when I say it that way, but we'll get into that definitely as we go into it. But for those of us who are not in the loop, what's happening? Why are we talking about this guy, Carl Lentz? Who is Carl Lentz and what has happened? So Josh, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to the man himself? And then let's talk about what's actually happened that we need to talk about it.
Yeah. So many of you will know the global megachurch Hillsong. We've talked about them many times on the show. Many of us listen to their music. Not as many people have seen their church services or their preachers, but quite a massive influence on the Christian world in general. Like, it's funny, whenever people talk about a contemporary church song, they'll call it like a Hillsong when it might not, it's become like like you Google something. It's, so in the same way, Hillsong is sort of getting at that level of sort of influence. They have church campuses all across the world. Originally started in Australia, Sydney, Australia.
This is true.
And even more of a claim to fame, Brian Houston was originally from Wellington, New Zealand.
That's right. I believe he was born in Lower Hutt or something like that.
He was, yeah. And his wife, Bobby, from Papatoetoe. So,
wow. And I believe they actually met in Tauranga at a youth camp or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a couple of Kiwis went over to Sydney and started this church.
Classic Kiwi thing to do.
Classic. Bada bing, bada boom, mega church. No, it's a pretty massive story.
Happens every time.
Yeah. Anyway, it's sort of exploded into this huge global church movement. Campuses in I think 6 continents. Yeah, pretty crazy. Pretty amazing growth, particularly in the last decade. The growth has just been explosive. It's been insane to watch. They sort of in the last decade made a big push. I think it's in the last decade, maybe just before that. They made a big push into the US, which is interesting because there are already so many other big mega churches in the US. So, one of the more notable places that they made the big push was into New York. That was really where, because their whole thing with Hillsong is they have churches in influential cities across the world. That's their whole how they want to influence the world to know Jesus and spread the gospel is doing it through influential cities.
I'm just saying
influential churches in influential cities. I'm
just reading here. 2010 was when they launched. Joel and Carl launched in New York.
Yeah. And so that's the whole thing. So New York, they would have had laser eyes focused on, we've got to get that right. So lo and behold, they send Joel Houston, who was the leader of Hillsong United, or still is the leader of Hillsong United, and I think he used to be the creative director of Hillsong globally. So they send him to Hillsong New York to be the worship leader, which... Can you imagine starting a church with that as your worship leader?
I do find it funny because I don't know if you remember this, but around that time, I was in the Central Coast and there was a bunch of pastors who kind of were around the Hillsong sort of circles, and they were like, "Oh, Brian and Joel, they've had a big feud and they've fought about this and that and the other thing," and so now Joel's going over to the US, kind of like an exile because he's disagreeing with his dad or something like that. It was all a lot of hearsay, but I don't know if any of it was actually true or if it was all nonsense, but that was kind of the big buzz at the time.
Who knows? I mean, this is something I have appreciated about Hillsong over the years. They don't seem to keep their best. Like, they used to have all these like really amazing leaders at their primary campus, which is the Hills campus in Sydney. But pretty much all the most incredible leaders they had there, they've sent overseas to plant churches elsewhere. So they're very good at sending, which is something I think any church could learn a bit from, at least. Just incredible sending capacity to send these people and just build new leaders after they've sent them. It's been really cool. So that's how I assume it was. I also heard rumors about that drama, but I have had no proof of it, so I don't know. And so then the guy they sent to pastor this movement was Carl Lentz. So he's been the pastor of Hillsong New York and eventually became sort of the pastor of Hillsong East Coast, I think was his title. The whole East Coast of the US was like Carl's responsibility, with his primary campus being in New York.
And they were launching campus after campus up and down the East Coast. Like, seemed like they were shooting off.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And like a lot of people have tried to start big churches in New York and many have failed. It's been a very hard place to plant churches. Apparently, I wouldn't know. I've never even been there.
Yeah, I remember listening to a Kerry Newhoff leadership podcast a few years ago, probably now. And there was a guy that was on the podcast talking about planting churches, particularly in like the northeast of the US, along that strip of land, like Boston and Maine and those sorts of areas. Seemingly an extremely difficult place to do ministry, to plant churches, to actually be successful. So yeah, it definitely seems like whatever they were doing, it was successful enough that they were expanding and not just... Because I think in New York, yes, it's difficult to launch a church, but if you've got the Hillsong chops, you can probably do okay in New York, just there. But it seemed like they were going beyond New York in that whole thing.
Yeah. No, I think so. And that's the interesting thing about Hillsong. When they plant a church, they're already going with an established brand, which is super interesting. And I guess we do too. Like even as Seventh-day Adventist churches, when you move
it's just that we don't have a strong
Seventh-day Adventist sign.
Yeah,
there are people who know what that's about, but probably not in the same way people have heard about Hillsong.
Yeah. It's funny because like, if Seventh-day Adventists were to do a similar thing, like Hillsong have very much founded themselves on the brand of their music, and the music is something that reaches across denominational pews. And if you come to a new city with Hillsong, you instantly have recognition because people are singing your songs. It's not the same with Adventists, you know. If we had some sort of...
Maybe at least in the Western world, because I know like, you know, there are countries like Nepal and that kind of thing. And where like particularly like ADRA have really
that's true.
Yeah. So at least in this Western context, I would say. But yeah, maybe in other contexts, at least the brand like ADRA, there would be a different, a sort of different thing.
But isn't that interesting that ADRA would probably make the Adventist church more visible in areas that have needed ADRA? Like that makes a lot of sense, but inversely, you wouldn't think that would be the areas that Hillsong would go to launch a church. Like you wouldn't see Hillsong going to Kathmandu to plant a church, Hillsong Kathmandu. Whereas in the West, I guess probably more influential, wealthier areas, they have that brand recognition. Which is, I don't know, it's interesting.
Pretty interesting. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's different to us anyway. So
yes,
So pretty much that's the lowdown on who Carl Lentz is. Has had a lot of success in the context of planting Hillsong church and campuses in the US and bridging the gap into the church and New York. So really interesting guy and someone who I've definitely looked up to a lot over the years.
Yes. And I definitely want you to talk more about that because Josh has a personal connection with Carl, very deep personal connection that is going to expose Carl even more in this episode. Keep tuning in, folks, for more amazing facts about
the scoop.
But we're not talking. So we're not talking about Carl Lentz because he's so amazing and because he's been so successful, which is all true. But he did a bit of an oopsie. That seems like a fairly trite way to say it.
Yeah,
but it's
pretty underrated way. A big oopsie. I'm
trying to undersell the brevity of this situation. No,
it's pretty bad. It's pretty sad to see.
Yeah. So I guess the cold hard facts, and if you know the situation, you know what I'm going to say. He has been fired, not like stepping down, like he has actually been fired, and he is in a fairly shocking and sudden manner, I suppose. He announced it himself on his Instagram. I am going to just read what he said. He announced on Instagram that he had been fired, Brian Houston announced that he had fired. So the founder of Hillsong announced that he had fired Mr. Lentz, citing leadership issues and breaches of trust, plus a recent revelation of moral failures. So the first part, fairly vague, leadership issues and breaches of trust. So I'm not quite sure exactly what he's referring to there. Possibly some more under the table in-house stuff. The big one is that last little bit, the recent revelations of moral failure. And he actually confessed the day after on Instagram. So I'm getting to that now. He's saying that I was unfaithful in my marriage, the most important relationship in my life. Basically, what happened was he developed a relationship with a fashion designer in New York who was involved with the church or involved with him in some way. It developed into a romantic relationship, and he ended up cheating on his wife, and it came out I think his wife found messages or something like that on his phone or something. Anyway, either way, it came out, and he confessed it, and then he was fired. And I don't know, it sounds pretty brutal, but that's what happened.
It's pretty sad for his like wife and kids and stuff, and yeah, his church must be like heartbroken.
Yeah,
because you look up to a pastor a lot, you know. Well, some people do, I guess.
Well, I mean,
look, community.
We're pastors, and you know, when it comes to the sort of people that we want to be, you know, these are often the types of figures who we look to as spiritual fathers, spiritual uncles, spiritual big brothers, to kind of go, okay, this is what I want my ministry to look like. And I know that Carl was that for you a fair bit. Hey.
Yeah. So I've actually met Carl Lentz, believe it or not. Not that he would remember or anything like that. It's not really that big a deal. But way back when I was like, I would have been like 17, 18. So I have attended a few Hillsong conferences in my life. Ooh. And part of that program is an event that they do for teens, which now is called Young and Free, but it used to be called Hillsong Jam. That's what the teen ministry was called. Jam.
That's way cooler than Young and Free. That's levels of cool. Amazing.
I remember the ad for that year, like that they made. It was like they had these jam bottles and they're like smashing them against walls and stuff, but they'd like done this effect to the jam inside or whatever the liquid was, and it was like amazing colors like exploding out of it. It was really cool. I was like, yeah, jam. Anyway, so yeah, it was interesting, right? I remember, I think it was like Carl Lentz's big event preaching debut. I'd never heard of him before this. I mean, I wasn't that into Hillsong before this. This was like my first or second year at it. He had long hair and I think he had just graduated from Hillsong College or something recently. And they were making all these jokes about that he looked like I don't know if you've seen that statue of like Jesus, the California Jesus, or whatever. He's like smiling and winking and finger guns or whatever. They were saying he looked at that. He did. It was pretty accurate. Anyway, but he got up and he preached and it was awesome. Yeah. To be honest, like he spoke like so, I'd never heard a preacher like him, you know, to be honest. Just like he was so raw, yet he was so funny, and yet he spoke into like things that, man, preachers don't talk about this stuff, you know, and in such a real way, like hit issues that I actually cared about.
yeah, it was really cool. And I remember thinking like, man, this guy's awesome. And then I didn't hear about him for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden we're at a Hillsong conference and they had this moment where this is like a few years later, they had this thing. It was called like, I can't remember what it was called, but they got a bunch of their young gun preachers to get up and do, there was like 4 or 5 of them. I think it was 5. It was 5 for 5 because they got 5 of their young upcomings to do 5-minute sermons each. Like straight after. I think they did a sermon, there was a sermon song. Really cool concept, actually, I think. It was a cool way to like, just, I guess, showcase. But
sure.
Yeah, I think it was a way to give them a really cool opportunity too, and to see like, hey, here's what the next generation of preaching could look like.
Yeah, it's a cool opportunity. Like if you're just an upcoming preacher and you would never have an opportunity to speak in like front of a conference audience, like that's crazy.
So, but giving it's like 20,000 people.
Yeah. 5 minutes is not a big sort of deal.
No, and I'm pretty sure all of those guys have gone on to plant Hillsong campuses now.
Wow.
But back then, Carl would have been making moves in America then. But yeah,
sure.
I think, since then all the rest have too, if I can remember who they all were. But yeah. And I saw him again. I'm like, wow. And his hair was cut short and he was wearing this like cool leather jacket and stuff, which is sort of, is sort of his signature look now.
Yeah, totally.
And I was like, oh, it's that guy. I remember him. And
it's California Jesus.
It was just as good. Like, I was like, man, 5 minutes and he still smashed it. This guy's awesome. And so I just started following him. I really appreciated the way, like, he seemed to just be really, or to me anyway at the time, he just seemed to be himself. Like, I'd never seen a pastor that looked or acted or talk like him. But I was like, wow, he's just himself and people accept him for that. I thought that was really cool. And then the next year, I went to this. I found my way into again another Hillsong conference and into a leadership breakfast sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Long story there, but anyway, I got in, and a bunch of their leaders were there. It was really cool, and actually, it might have been a couple of years later. But anyway, I don't know. I can't remember exactly. But I was standing somewhere and he walked in, like Carl Lentz walked in like late, and I was like, oh, wow, that's him. Like, I'm like, man, he's really tall. I did not realize how tall. Carl was kind of intimidating. But I'd heard him talk and stuff. I'd say like one of his best evangelistic tools is to, like he said, one of my best evangelistic phrases is, hey, cool pumps, man, or whatever, or cool kicks, man, or something like that. It was like something about like complimenting someone on their shoes.
Sure.
Because it's how he like strikes up conversations with people in New York, because so many of them are so vain and whatever. So that's what he said. I'm not saying that about people in New York. I don't know people in New York. So that's what he said. He's like,
you're really
cares about fashion.
Really covering your bases there, bro.
Oh, I am. I don't want to make it sound like it's me saying that, because I'm like, that sounds super mean to say about people. But anyway, that's what
I'm just saying what Carl Lentz said, which is that people in New York are vain. Not my. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, and I thought that was cool. So I was like, well, if I want to get his attention, I'm going to take a leaf out of his book. And he walked in and I was like, hey, cool jacket, man. And instantly he like turned and walked over to me and shook my hand. I was like, dang, it worked. And I'm like,
it's super effective.
Yeah. And come over. I was chatting, introduced myself and that kind of thing. And then I was like, so you're like the pastor of Hillsong New York. Yeah, I think I've seen you before. And he was like, oh, yeah. Hey, do you have a phone charger? And I was like, nah, I don't. He's like, oh, my phone's about to die, so I got to go find one. All right, see you, man. And walked off. I'm like, cool. I met Carl Lentz. Didn't wash my hand for months afterwards. No,
imagine if you were able to give him a phone charger. Like, here, I've got your phone charger. I could have
been like, yeah, man, here, let's just go plug it into this wall behind me and sit down and chat.
That's true. That's true.
There. So now I carry a phone charger with me everywhere I go. No, I don't.
Just in case you run into Carl Lentz again.
Yeah, you never know. No. So that's the only time I've seen him preach multiple times after that.
Yeah.
The different things. So yeah, he's always been someone. I mean, the last few years I've kind of grown away from that. Not really caring as much. Just at the time back then when I was sort of studying Avondale.
That was quite a formative.
Studying to be a pastor and all that kind of thing. It was cool to see such a different picture of what a pastor could look like. Not saying I necessarily needed to look like that, but for me, it was like, that guy's so different, and I think there should be, more kinds of pastors, more like not the same cookie cutter sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, because let's be real, we're in a traditional denomination and most pastors are, have at least 20 years on you and me. And a lot of them, they look the same, they talk the same, they think the same, they have the same resources. I mean, not everybody, there's still a lot of diversity in our church, but when it comes to our denomination, looking up to, okay, what kind of pastor do I want to be? It's like, okay, middle-aged white guy wearing a button-up white shirt with a pen protector. No pen protector. That's a caricature, but that's kind of what we have to look up to. And there's nothing wrong with that specifically, but
I think it is changing. I mean, now,
yeah.
But when I was at Avondale, it felt like all the other pastors who I'd seen who were employed, they felt very far away from what I was, like
Correct.
Age and just personality and style wise. I guess just felt like, wow, that's
how many older pastors, have long hair and, are okay with playing Halo or, whatever once in a while. Like that's not what you think of when you think of pastors. It's
no,
not even.
I hadn't met any like that. I felt like I was super, but now I feel like, I mean, I have still haven't met that many other long-haired pastors in the Adventist church. It's like, guys, where are you? No. Well, actually, we had Alex. Not Alex. Who we have? Chai guy.
Oh
no. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin.
Wait, can we edit that? I don't want to say his name wrong, but we had him just as okay.
Yeah.
No, we had Kevin. The chai guy. He had long hair.
That's true.
That's one.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are others.
I'm sure there are somewhere. But even it's funny, like the other day, like I do interviews with new parents at my school, and one of the mums who came in to do an interview with me, when she met me, she was like, oh, you're Jesse. And then I was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, I was kind of like expecting a white-haired older guy in like a button-up. And I was like, yeah, no. Even people expect that.
Years. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's true. And yeah. So at the time, it was really helpful to have something like that, I guess. Yeah. Now, yeah. But like I said, now I feel like the church is changing now. I feel like I see more diversity in pastors slowly. Not fully there, but yeah. That's something I think I've seen anyway. Maybe I'm just seeing things, but that's what I think I've seen.
Yeah. So I think it would be really helpful for us to dig into a little bit more about, I guess, Carl Lentz's whole ethos in ministry. And I think, you can be anybody and end up making a mistake like what he made. It doesn't matter what denomination you're in, what brand of ministry you are subscribed to. You can still mess up and make a mistake. We're all human. We're all imperfect. So definitely not like big judgment on Carl. Oh, he's such a terrible guy. He cheated on his wife. None of that. But I do think it is interesting. There's an article in the New York Times, which is, I think, quite appropriate, called The Rise and Fall of Carl Lentz, the Celebrity Pastor of Hillsong Church. They kind of go through the details of the entire affair up to the time when, details were relevant and available. No doubt in the coming days and weeks, more details will come out. Not really important at this point in time, but I do think it is really interesting. Some of the things they talked about in terms of the brand of church and the brand of ministry that Hillsong New York was participating in, or even perhaps even paving the way for, because in many ways they are very much a Hillsong church, but in other ways they were going in a slightly different direction to the rest of the church worldwide. Because let's not be I guess subtle about it. New York is it's a high level city. It's a prestigious city. If you live in New York, then you're clearly doing something, significant in your life. Nobody lives in New York because they want to have a relaxed, just chilled out lifestyle.
Well, I don't know, man. I watched Spider-Man, and there's people who own just pizza shops in New York and delis and that kind of thing.
There's regular people there too, right?
Well, no, that's true. That's true. There is a pizza place in New York in Carroll Gardens called Lucali's, and the guy who owns it, Mark Iacono, is like very much a evangelist for the old way of New York, where everybody kind of knew each other and there was like a established neighborhood and everybody looked out for each other, and there was a local mum and dad sort of corner store on every corner. But I'm just watching this stuff on YouTube, like, because I'm really into pizza culture and all that sort of stuff, and New York is like a big part of that. But he often laments the fact that New York is no longer sort of it's not becoming that anymore. It's more expensive to live there. It's more like high-paced lifestyle. And I don't know. Hillsong is definitely, like, New York is the right place for Hillsong to launch, but I do think it is significant to note that, like, Hillsong is in Kiev, it's in London, it's in Buenos Aires, or are they in Buenos Aires? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they're in all these big cities all around the world. But I think if you're going to be in a big city, like, the big city is New York. So it's a big deal that they were able to get into New York, and it's a big deal that they were able to actually do something significant there. But it seems like what was happening in New York, like, more was happening in Hillsong New York than was happening in Hillsong London or Hillsong Kiev, because you have in America this whole celebrity culture which is all consuming, and you have this guy leading the church who, unlike a lot of the guys who are launching campuses in Kiev, in London, in South Africa, whatever, wherever else there are Hillsong campuses, there's this guy who is attracting the likes of Justin Bieber, for instance. Carl Lentz, Justin Bieber, best of buddies, apparently. Kevin Durant, Selena Gomez, just to name a few celebrities who have rubbed shoulders, and there are many, many more. But it seems that this celebrity association, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with, ministering to celebrities. I definitely think that he had a defined mission of this is something that not a lot of pastors can do, and he was doing it well. But it seems to have changed the tone of Hillsong New York. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they definitely seem to have their own way of doing it. I don't know. I just assumed that was just American culture, though. Do you know what I mean? Because, again, I don't know that much about it. I just assumed that's just, they're just being relative to the culture, and that's kind of... I mean, Hillsong do that to an extent, but not really. They're still like, you go to... I remember when I was in London, just decided to drop into a Hillsong, and it felt just like being back in Australia at a Hillsong church there. Everything was the same. And then my friends, they were in France, so they dropped into a Hillsong Paris or something. They said it felt just like being at Hillsong Brisbane, So it's... I think they tend to just do the same thing everywhere. But yeah, I don't know. At the same time, I'm like, well, how long can you just do the same thing? Like, surely the culture has to eventually, like, get in and make sure. And New York is such a strong, seemingly from where I am, seems like such a strong culture,
Yeah.
It's people are so proud to be New Yorkan?
New Yorkers, yeah.
Yeah, New Yorkers, like...
Yeah.
By the way I see it anyway. Again, I don't know. I've never been there. I haven't really met anyone from New York, so I don't know.
I think
my education on this comes from Spider-Man. Not even joking.
That's great. And I think that's fair. And I think, I definitely think that a lot of that has to do with being relevant to the culture. And you're right. When you go to Hillsong overseas, a lot of it is, it's kind of like McDonald's, like they have the same experience no matter where you are, or at least they're getting really close to, whilst taking into account the culture of the place and the time and all that sort of thing. Yeah. One thing that, I have noticed is it's not, so in our denomination, a pastor gets up, he preaches a sermon, even if it's a church of 1,000 people, in an Adventist church, most of the time the preacher can get down, he can get off the pulpit, finish the service, and then anybody can pretty much go up to him and tell them exactly what they thought of his sermon, whether they loved it, whether they hated it. They can ask him questions, him or her, whatever. And generally the pastor is always accessible by pretty much anyone, even if they're considered a celebrity, because we have our small-time celebrities in the Adventist church.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. I mean, I've never seen, like, for example, I've never been to, like, Doug Batchelor's church.
Fair.
But I wonder if after he speaks, I'm not saying, I don't know. I literally have no idea. Like, I wonder how accessible he is. Like, if he preached a message, could me, just random Josh, just waltz up and be like, hey, I didn't like what you said about this, or I love this. Can we talk about that more?
Yeah.
Could I? I don't know. Because
that's a fair question.
He's pretty famous. Like, really. There's a lot of people there.
I assume that, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, like if Ted Wilson, the current president of the Adventist General Conference, if he spoke, surely if he spoke somewhere, I don't know, surely he'd be, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's hard to say.
I know if you're
I can't picture it.
I know if you're at Crosswalk Church, you know, you can chat to Tim if you want to, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure that's, I've never been to Crosswalk, but I assume Tim's a nice guy.
Tim came on our podcast.
He must be a nice guy.
He must be accessible.
Yeah.
Surely.
Right?
And Sam Lenore.
Yeah.
Both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
They're great guys. So I'm assuming that, it must be.
All that to say anyway. So we have this mutual friend, Mitch. And if you're listening, Mitch, hello. He went to Hillsong Hills once. And he really wanted, Brian Houston was preaching. He really wanted to ask him a question. And
I was there. I was with Mitch.
Were you? You can tell this. Oh, you tell the story then. You can tell it much better than I can.
Oh, no. I kind of want to hear you tell it now.
Well, all I remember him telling me was that he tried to go up to Brian to speak to him because I think Brian was in the congregation after the church somewhere that you could see him. You could see him. But then a security guard stopped him and wouldn't let him go up to Brian or something like that. Is that correct or not?
That's not what I remember.
Okay.
Brian was standing close because they have like a security guard. It's been the same guy doing it for years too. Like every time I go there, it's the same guy. Really nice guy too, funnily enough. I've chatted to him just randomly before. He was really nice.
Okay.
But he stands right where like the entrance to like all the PA gear is, and then to like the side and backstage areas. So I think it's to more stop people going down there. But yeah, Brian was coincidentally, well, he sits quite close to that area anyway, which I guess kind of makes sense. But he was standing just in front of him. But what I remember was there was another pastor there. Like there were a few of the pastors there. So Mitch actually spoke to Joel LaBelle.
Okay.
If you know Joel LaBelle.
Yeah, he's the executive pastor or Hillsong Australia lead or something like that.
Yeah, he used to be the pastor of Hillsong Australia, but now he's gone and started his own church.
Yes.
Yeah. So he actually spoke to, I'm pretty sure it was Joel LaBelle he was speaking to, which is a pretty big deal. But
sure.
I don't know if he necessarily cared because he wanted to speak to Brian about something.
Yeah.
But I think what they do is they have all the pastors there. So if they can answer a question for you about Hillsong or about the message or something, they'll try.
Brian doesn't have to.
And one of the questions Mitch asked, Joel answered. But then another thing was about something. I think he wanted to ask something. Mitch, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, if you're listening. But I remember him asking about something about like what it's like as a pastor doing media appearances or something, and like being on, because he'd done quite a few. And Mitch had it was actually a really good question around. I can't remember exactly how he worded it. It was something about like how, like, and it wasn't mean. It was like a genuine question about like pastors and media appearances or something. And so he was like, and then Joel was like, oh yeah, well, you'd have to ask Brian that. And then Brian was already swamped talking to a bunch of people. And then he went backstage and that was it. And then Mitch was like, oh, I want to, and then that's when the security guard was like, oh no, can't go past here.
Okay. No,
that's how I remember it. I could be wrong.
But even, okay. All right. That's even better than how I was envisioning it, because at least in that situation, you have a pastor who is willing to chat about this stuff. And then you have Brian, who is actually technically available up to a certain point, which is, I think is fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, there's like that building can seat between 3,000 and 5,000 people.
Sure.
And they do like 4 services in there a day.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're pumping people through constantly, and you're having to get up there every single time to preach a sermon, which is pretty intense. I can't imagine being in that, position.
No, it would be hard work.
Yeah. So anyway, the reason I bring that up, because it seems like that's fairly standard operating procedure as far as Hillsong's, PR and how pastors interact with the regular people, et cetera, et cetera.
At the bigger campuses, yeah. Because I went to like Hillsong Melbourne when that first started, just because I was curious. Way back, man. I really sound like such a Hillsong junkie. I guess I was a lot more of a Hillsong junkie back then. Wow, say this out loud. I'm like, man, this is kind of embarrassing how much of. But I remember Hillsong Melbourne when that first started, because that was just like a room full of like 200-300 people, right?
Sure.
Which is pretty good for your first couple of services or whatever. But yeah, the pastors were just hanging out afterwards, chatted to them heaps. Every time they're like, oh, hey, welcome back. Saw you here last week, that kind of thing. I think as it grows, though, they're sort of, it's sort of how do you keep it sustainable, which I guess is fair. But then at the same time, it's asking questions as well. Should you have a church of 3,000 people if you can't even connect with all of them? I guess is the follow-up question to that. But,
and that's a very, very, very good question to ask. Yeah. But I don't know. We're not experts in church planting or anything like that. The reason I wanted to bring it up was because it seems like New York was kind of taking that and kind of like multiplying it by a fairly ridiculous margin, because one of the complaints, at least, that I see in this article is that many of the congregants who were able to speak to the New York Times felt like Carl Lentz and church leadership was emphasizing the celebrity part of their congregation and kind of leaving everybody else off to the side, which is quite an interesting position to be in. Like, I don't know that many churches could really say those words, like all the celebrities are being catered to and nobody else. Like, it's fairly unique.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah.
It's so weird. Yeah. I
remember reading in that article. I just found it actually.
Yeah.
Just these 2 paragraphs. It's like, no pastor at a big church can have a personal relationships with every parishioner, which is true. Like, honestly, once I started pastoring at a church over 100, I was like, oh yeah, you can't get to know everybody. It's impossible. But Mr. Lentz, this is according to this article, was unusually remote. According to current and former congregants, he seemed to disappear for months at a time, appearing on stage at church only intermittently. His Instagram showed him attending Super Bowls in Florida and at Bieber's wedding at South Carolina Resort. And when he did appear on Sundays, he rarely mixed with churchgoers. And I'm like, that's weird to read about. It's like if you're their pastor,
you kind of want to be present, like
at least
most of the time,
as much as practical.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. And this is it. Like, and apparently, according to this article, they're also doing things like if a celebrity comes to your church, they have a special section for them away from the other people. And even they take time to mention that there have been celebrities who have gone to Hillsong New York who have wanted to just kind of mingle with everybody else, be that anonymous person in church, just like everybody else. And that the ushers at Hillsong New York were instructed that if that happened, that they would actually go and get that person and usher them into the VIP section, right? Which is,
wow.
I just can't imagine a VIP box for church. Like, I know that we have church members who think that they have a VIP section because they chose it, but that's not the same thing.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, in one part of me is, and I think it's a smaller part, but one part of me is like, it's cool that they're trying to minister to celebrities, because I think that is something that churches aren't necessarily doing well. And there are some celebrities who probably need a more secluded experience in order to truly enjoy, or to truly maybe engage with the church, you know. Not saying that maybe it is a VIP. I don't know. I'm just thinking about it because I'm like, okay, so say we just had our church here and we were like, we got like 200 people at our current church. And then, like, say randomly, one week, Peter Jackson walks into, actually no, probably people don't know Peter Jackson's face enough.
Bro, I know Peter Jackson's face.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know. I'm just trying. I think about a New Zealand celebrity.
Stan Walker.
Stan Walker. No, actually, let's go bigger. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is currently living in New Zealand.
What?
Yeah, he is in Wellington since lockdown or something. He came over for filming and then was like, I'm just going to stay here for a bit, apparently.
Okay.
So if you ever see a guy who looks suspiciously like Joseph Gordon-Levitt wearing a baseball cap and walking through the streets, it's probably Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Anyway, how do I know that? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure. But let's just say, hypothetically, he came in not hiding his look or anything as Joseph Gordon-Levitt, right? It would be pretty hard. I don't know. I'm trying to think what would happen.
Yeah.
Would people be like the whole time like, hey, are you Joseph Gordon-Levitt? Or would my church just not even care? I don't even know. Certainly some people would be like, that's definitely Joseph. I need to talk to him.
Yeah.
And get a few photos. But then if he came again the next week and there were photos of him on Instagram at the church, you know that it wouldn't just be, it wouldn't just like people would come specifically for that, right?
Yeah.
So
no, I can see that. On the other
what are
hand,
the chances of that happening? I don't know.
but then is the answer to create a VIP section where they cannot be accessed by anybody else and treat them like the VIP that everybody thinks that they are. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's
that doesn't seem very New Testament to me, to be honest. Like the whole point of in the New Testament, like those churches were that like the free and the slave, the Jew and the Gentile, the rich and the poor would all eat at the same table. That's exactly what happened in those early churches. And so like, I can't. Yeah.
If
like,
Joseph Gordon-Levitt showed up to your Bible study and you were just like, okay, dude, you're part of this Bible study. Yeah, you're a celebrity. Yeah, this is weird, but we're just going to carry on because we're here to study the Bible and be in each other's lives and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's New Testament. To me, that's more of the picture. And I do think in a way, I understand why a celebrity would want to go to a bigger church. Like, there's a lot more anonymity. And I think that's what a lot of celebrities probably do without a lot of people noticing it, is just showing up, slipping into the crowd. Okay, one or two people might notice you, but then when everybody goes home and there's a big crowd, you can just slip out and just go about your day and you can still have a spiritual experience, you know?
Yeah, not hard out. Like, I mean, friends I would invite to church, right? When I invited them to my small church that this is when where was I? This is in Melbourne, which was like less than 100 people. I was like, oh, you want to come to a church? They're like, oh yeah, what's it like? Yeah, it's just like probably like 60 of us and that kind of thing. They're like, sounds a bit intense. I was like, yeah, that's fair enough. Then I'm like, do you want to come to Hillsong with me or like this big church with me? There's like 2,000 people there. They're like, oh yeah, I'll come to that. We'll just slip in the back kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
I think some people maybe earlier on in their church experience some people, not all people, some people, they'll jump straight into a small group and that'll be amazing for them. But other people, I feel like, need to watch from a distance, which was sort of what you can do online a bit now too.
And, you know, like with people like Craig Rochelle, that's actually an intentional way that they create their church services to actually give people anonymity who don't want to be, oh, you're a visitor. Hey, stand up. And we'll all say hello. Like, that is the opposite of what you want, even though a lot of church people just do not get that. But actually giving people the opportunity to be anonymous if they want to be anonymous can be really powerful, of like, if somebody has not had a good church experience. But anyway, it's kind of like what we're talking about, but it's not exactly. I think it does come back to, how do you minister to celebrities? And obviously he was doing this and he was doing it well, but it doesn't seem like that exactly was meshing with the experience of regular New Yorkers who wanted a church experience and had chosen Hillsong New York to be their home. Yeah. I think is probably the bottom line to that discussion. And we're not experts on this, and we're definitely not the right people to figure out the best way to appeal to celebrities. But I did want to pick on towards the end of the article, there's this subtitle, "The Opposite of the Gospel," one of the things that people often, especially in our denomination and more conservative denominations, is they pick on Hillsong for not having like a true gospel. Most of that, in my opinion, is nonsense because you're picking on one or two things out of context and you're not really getting to the heart of it. But it's interesting here that they actually do highlight many ways in which what was happening was not really gospel, kingdom of heaven. In particularly, it revolves around this idea of how volunteers relate to the celebrity culture. And they talk a little bit about how the staff and the pastors and their celebrity friends, they would often put on these big events to honor this, that, and the other thing, to celebrate this, that, and the other thing. And often it would be the volunteers who would spend the blood, sweat, and tears to make it all happen, but would not reap the rewards of said experiences. So I know that sounds really vague, but let me just use I'll use an example. So all churches rely to some degree on volunteer labor to function, but several former Hillsong volunteers described a particularly intense culture of working 12 or more hours a day and then being treated as low-status workers by church leaders. They go on to say, after the staff enjoyed catered dinners on Saturday evenings at the church offices, volunteers would be summoned from home to come in and clean the kitchen, according to Miss McClanahan, who worked for the church and was also close with leaders, including the Lentzes. Ms. McClanahan recalled attending, along with Ms. Lentz, a birthday party for a pastor's wife in a private room at the Williamsburg restaurant, and Williamsburg is in Brooklyn, I believe, so it's probably a pretty ritzy place. And seeing a friend who was a church volunteer sitting at the edge of the room. The volunteer had been enlisted to drive partiers home in the wee hours of the morning, but had not been invited to enjoy the party himself.
What?
So that's like the ultimate, you're a nerd, drive us to the party, but don't come to the party. We're going to have a fun time while you sit here and watch us. There's something about that, man, that just kind of makes me mad, you know? Because look, this is probably me projecting my own situation onto the Lentzes and this whole thing. But man, our churches would not function without the amazing volunteers that come in week after week to serve, to give of their time and their talents. And it just seems so dishonorable of these people to be able to, and these are just two examples. I don't know if this is indicative of the entire volunteer culture or the leadership's relationship with volunteers. I know that most Hillsong churches are pretty keen on honoring and making their volunteers feel like $1 million because they should be.
That's what I don't know. Anytime I've seen the way leaders interact with volunteers in Australia, it's always been they love on them so much. Yeah. It's crazy to me to even hear this kind of stuff.
It doesn't seem like Hillsong.
No, it doesn't. And I don't know, maybe there's stuff I'm not seeing, or maybe this article is maybe
it could be skewing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say if this is exactly what happened. This is what the article is reporting, but I want that to not be true because that is makes me sick.
Yeah. The thing that makes me the most probably angry though is the last little part where it talks about Mr. Lentz seemed to surround himself with people primarily concerned with protecting his reputation. So there's this ex-volunteer, her name is Melissa Zaraski, a volunteer who helped lead regular meetings of congregants for a year, said that she had heard rumors about Mr. Lentz's quote unquote inappropriate behavior with women. And this is back in 2017. All right. So this is a couple of years ago. So she had not witnessed anything, but she felt that it was important to pass it on. And so she did. She passed it on to some staff leaders, and apparently her concerns just got brushed off until it reached a staff pastor named Kane Keating, who told her that she was then unfit for leadership, and basically she got fired from her position, her volunteer position, might I add. And she was told that she was unfit for leadership. And her co-leader, who had also raised alarms, apparently was removed from his position too. She felt that what had happened was the opposite of the gospel and like a cover-up. It notes here in the article that Mr. Keating said that he did not recall telling Ms. Zaraski that she was unfit for leadership when he dismissed her. So, look, this is one person's word against another. In a court of law, this would be just hearsay. So take it with a grain of salt, if you will. But it seems like what was happening here at the church was a culture of honoring leaders. And we definitely know that from Hillsong. Hillsong has been very, very strong on honoring leaders. But the departure is where Hillsong seems to be forgetting the other thing, which you just mentioned before, Josh, which is like we are going to make our volunteers feel like $1 million as well, because we know that without them, we would not be able to function. To the point where it seems that Carl Lentz, surrounding himself with people primarily concerned with protecting his reputation, it just makes me think of what happened with Mark Driscoll in Mars Hill Church I think it was about a decade ago now, where he wasn't cheating on people, but he was a bad manager. He was fudging financial records for this, that, and the other thing for his book sales, and he was not treating people well. And everybody around him was more interested in protecting his reputation than protecting the people who were getting hurt in the process. And it seems like a similar thing was happening here, where people were more willing to basically fire volunteers and to cover things up than to let the truth come out, whatever that truth may be. And it doesn't say what inappropriate behaviors were happening, but yeah, take that for what you will.
I mean, it sounds weird to say, but like, I'm glad Brian Houston took action and did something about it, because I've heard so many stories of churches where the same sort of thing happens and it just gets covered up and covered up and covered up. You know what I mean? I mean, there's that thing in 2017, but it doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm really sad, and I'm especially sad for like the victims, you know, sad for his family. I'm sad for the volunteers who've been mistreated and all that kind of thing. It's horrible, you know, this whole thing. But hopefully, like, I don't know. Hopefully there'll be some, you know, Carl can grow and like realize what he's been doing, and you know, hopefully their church can function well. You know, obviously I don't necessarily agree with Hillsong, like, I mean, especially on doctrine, but even on some practice kind of thing. But at the same time, like, you know, these are people who connect people to Jesus, and I think that's valuable. And I hope that they can continue doing that in a way, like, in the unique way they do it. And also, like, I know a lot of young pastors, even in our church, who really looked up to Carl, and I'm hoping that there's not too much discouragement there, that they can look beyond Carl and look beyond this, and I don't know. Sounds so cliche, but like, you know, keep looking to Jesus as like the ultimate, you know. But I mean, even Paul, like he said, like, follow me as I follow Jesus kind of thing. We have people that we follow because we love the way that, I don't know, they express their faith and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping, like, I don't know. It doesn't, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
It's definitely a confusing time as we're processing this. But I think, like you, I've definitely found some really key takeaways to this whole situation. And I think, I mean, for me personally, it's almost a confirmation of something that I've been feeling for a long time. And that is this just growing distaste with the, not the pastors ministering to celebrities, but people seeing pastors as celebrities and pastors wanting to be celebrities to have influence and things like that. I think you could probably, I've been wrestling with, like, again, you mentioned Paul, right? If we had a celebrity pastor in the first century, apart from Jesus, it would have been Paul,
or Apollos.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, a bit of a
way
thing there, but yeah.
But I mean, Paul was way more like going here, there, and everywhere, meeting with kings and emperors, and planting churches all across the Mediterranean rim. Like he was a gun, and he also had some pretty serious personality challenges. But as far as a go-getter, somebody who people look to, certainly, he wrote most of our New Testament, and so I've been struggling with that. But I think in this day and age that we live in, where Carl Lentz, his influence and his success was definitely found in the local church, but I would argue probably was accelerated by his savvy use of social media, a way that he was able to personally connect with influential and famous people definitely fueled that. I mean, seeing Carl Lentz in an Instagram post with Kevin Durant or Justin Bieber, that's a serious thing, for a pastor, as we've already talked about many times. But I also think that what we have seen in this article, and no doubt the things that will come out over the next months and years of people and we don't know what's going to happen to the church. It may keep going. It may disintegrate. Who knows? I hope it doesn't disintegrate. I hope that people can still, find Jesus and find hope in New York, Hillsong. But I think that what we have seen is definitely evidence of what happens when that goes bad. When you take that idea of, I'm going to be somebody who can minister to celebrities, and they confuse that calling with actually being a celebrity and being somebody noteworthy and being somebody who should be protected, especially when it comes to indiscretions. If the indiscretions that was mentioned at the end of this article by this lady in 2017, if they were true, and we definitely know that the indiscretions that has led to his firing, they all came out. There's no debating about that. It seems that this is perhaps a case study of where that culture can lead a person and can lead a church leadership. And so for me, this has definitely been a takeaway of, I've admired Carl Lentz just like you. He hasn't been as big of an influence in my life as he has in yours, but I've admired Carl Lentz and Stephen Furtick and John Gray and many of these admittedly American pastors who have a fantastic social media following and minister to celebrities and drive cool cars and speak on stages to tens of thousands of people and have Rolexes and, wear Yeezys.
I'm not as into that. Like, as soon as I remember, like, John Gray bought his wife a Lamborghini or something for her birthday.
Are you serious? I did not know that.
Yeah. So I was like, nah, I'm not here. I just unfollowed. I'm like, I'm not here for that, man. Like, if you did it through your book sales or whatever, I don't know. It's your use of money or whatever, but I'm not. Nah, yeah. I'm not keen,
See, but here's the thing for me. I look at that and I agree with you, but then everything around it seems so attractive. Like, it seems like this is the life. If you're going to be a pastor, if you're going to be devoting your life to preaching the word of Jesus, then why can't you preach the word of Jesus in those suits, on that stage, at that church? Do you know what I mean? Like, for me, as a human, flawed, sinful man, I look at that and go, I would much rather be doing that than wearing my Kmart $4 t-shirt, wearing $20 jeans.
Kmart? This was from Cotton On, bro.
See, even you're stepping up further than me. Preaching at my little church of 40 people. We don't even have a building. We're hiring a building. The financial worldly, sort of metrics. It's very, very attractive. But then I tell myself, okay, it's not about the money. It's not about the wealth, the influence, the connections. It's about reaching people for Jesus. He's reaching so many more people for Jesus. Man, if I could be like him, I could reach so many more people for Jesus. And then if I happen to get a pair of Yeezys, and if I happen to wear an Armani suit, and if I happen to drive a Lamborghini, well, that would just be nice, you know.
So be it.
So be it, you know. Such is my cross to bear.
Oh no.
You know? But see, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Of going, okay, that's nice. And that's very nice. It'd be very nice to be that person and to be the envy of everybody, or whatever. But then I look at stories like this and I go, I know not every pastor is going to end up here, but a lot of them have been. And look, I'm not going to make any aspersions about what pastors do behind closed doors, whatever. Okay, that's between them and God.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing the fame, I'm seeing the glitz and the glamour, the connections, the money, the influence, the power that comes along with all this stuff. And this is where it leads when it can go bad. I have no doubt that you could probably be the most humble, godly, God-fearing, pure of heart person and do this. But I know it couldn't be me. I wouldn't be able to handle it. I'd probably stuff up as well. I'd probably do something stupid, and I would probably end up like Carl Lentz if I ever got that opportunity.
Oh, bro. You look at like someone like Justin Bieber, and I actually heard, Judah Smith, who was also, it's funny, I actually thought Judah Smith had a lot more to do with Justin Bieber, but then when Bieber talks about it, he always talks about Carl Lentz. So I find that really interesting. But anyway, because Justin Bieber actually went to Judah's church before he became famous. But it's funny, like listening to Judah Smith talk, he's like, because people were saying, he did all this, he got drunk, all that sort of stuff, like, and yet he calls himself a Christian. What do you think about that? And Judah was like, you give an 18-year-old endless money and all of these people around him and cameras constantly on him. What do you think's going to happen? I'm like, fair call. Like, honestly, like that power can get to you, so easily, and the fame. And I think, in the pastoral world, even though, like, I don't know, like I see like some, we've talked to Christian influencers before on here, like, Chantel Smith, who we had on the podcast, she's now got like a massive following on TikTok and Instagram.
Yep.
Which is awesome to see. And she's doing really cool things. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's so awesome that she has that. And then I'm like, do I want that? And then I look at it and I'm like, that's kind of terrifying actually, like that sort of influence, like, and obviously it's not the same sort of level as like Carl Lentz or that kind of thing. But I'm like, man, that's having like thousands and thousands of people that you have influence over, which can be really good in terms of like influencing people towards Jesus. And that's always the goal, but it's not that you become more famous, but that he does. But yeah, like I don't know, there'd be so much temptation in that. Like the more things like your social media following grow and your church grow and all that kind of thing, this must be hard. I don't know, like.
Yeah.
Just totally coming at it from a purely human perspective. And then I think about the majority of people go to small churches.
True.
Still, you know? So the majority of pastors who've influenced the world for Jesus are probably people we'll never hear of.
Exactly.
It's a whole lot of pastors doing awesome things that nobody sees and talks about. Well, very few people see and talk about, So it's like, I'm proud to be in that, if that's like whatever, like I'm.
Yeah.
But you see this stuff and it's so tempting. It's like, whoa, look at that. If I had 800,000 followers, I could just send out a thing like, Jesus loves you. And look, bam, I've reached 800,000 people. Yeah. Job done. Pastor, check. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard, man. Because I get what you're saying. It's such a struggle. Yeah.
And I don't want to defend Carl's actions here either. Like,
no,
I definitely think he's done the wrong thing, and it takes a lot to go down that path. And that's from somebody who loves Carl. And I don't know. Surely you'd start picking this stuff up earlier.
Yeah. I definitely think even if Carl had the greatest of intentions, which let's give him the benefit of the doubt, I'm sure he did.
Man, like honestly, yeah, those sermons that he preached, in my opinion, you can't act that.
Yes.
I think it's definitely genuine.
Yeah.
At least originally.
Even having said that, even if he had the best of intentions, and we are believing that he had the best of intentions, somehow along the way, he built a church which had a leadership culture that was toxic and that enabled him to satisfy the worst of his impulses and his bad side, which everybody has, right? And so I guess that's the other takeaway for me. It's not that I want church leadership that's going to scrutinize everything that I do, everything that I say, but I want people in my life who can pull me up when I'm acting in a way that's dishonorable to people, dishonorable to God, dishonorable to myself, you know, who will question my motivations, who will question, is this the right thing to do, in a way that is Christ-like? Because I think we all need that, especially if you or I or anybody who's listening to this ever gets a disproportionately large amount of influence, you need that. And it just seems like that didn't happen for him. And even if he had people in his life, which I'm sure he did, I'm sure he had a pastor buddy, whether it was Rich Wilkerson or Judah Smith or whatever, who was able to chat to him about stuff, obviously it was not enough to stop him from going down this road that he did, which has led him to where he is now, which is sad. So I think that's the thing for me. You know, that's my final takeaway. I want people in my life who can keep me accountable, not just for the, you doing the right thing, Jesse, but also like calling out the best in me, helping me not to give in to my worst impulses, and who can be an authoritative figure to stop me from, going down those roads, which will be self-destructive. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, even having like knowing that somebody's going to talk to you about your sermon straight after you finish preaching it.
That's huge.
You know?
Just not feeling like
talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Like anybody in your congregation, not just the people you know, like your buds, but like anybody could.
I cannot imagine preaching a sermon and having it being so above scrutiny, like intentionally. Okay, we are going to make it so that you are above scrutiny, even when it comes to a sermon. I can't imagine that.
Imagine preaching a sermon and then just going backstage and then just sitting in the green room and eating a bag of chips by yourself. And that's it. And then you get in a car and go home. How weird, how foreign is that thought? I can't even like fathom. I mean, I don't know if I don't think that's what Carl did, but you know what I mean?
Just eating a bag of chips. That's his ritual.
Yeah. I don't know, but I was just
you know what? You know what? That sounds amazing though. There are some Saturdays.
No,
I'm being serious, man. In some Saturdays, some weekends when I'm getting up to preach, I don't want to talk to people. That's just me. I'm talking. That sounds amazing. But also I know that is something that I should never do. I should never put myself in a position where I have to do that, because I know that even if I don't want to see people, I need to, because that's good for me. It's good for my leadership and it's good for my soul to not feel like I'm so above people that I can do that. Like, that's so arrogant.
Right.
You know?
I see. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair.
I'm doing a lot of self-reflection, Josh. I'm doing a lot of self-reflection
you're an introvert
here.
too, and I'm an extrovert. So, I mean,
yes.
We see that differently too.
Yes. You see that and you say that, feel like that's the worst thing. I'm like, that's amazing.
But mind you, like even when you preach though, it's a very vulnerable thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can feel like, man, I'm scared of people talking to me about this afterwards. Not because I think I've said anything wrong. It's just like, I've shared my heart here.
Yeah.
What if someone's like, no, I don't like that? It's like, oh,
yeah,
you know, like,
absolutely.
Or when somebody comes up and like, oh, I love that. And then they'll say, I love when you said this. Then in your head, you're like, that's not what I said at all. Like, you've taken that totally wrong. That's another thing.
That's so funny.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's lots to think about here and lots to ponder, but
yeah.
We've been chatting about it for a while, so.
Yeah. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. What are your takeaways for those of us? Man, I'm sure there's a bunch of Avondale pastoral theology students listening to this, probably all collectively crying over the downfall of Carl Lentz, our hero Carl. But what are your takeaways, your leadership takeaways? If you're a church member, how would you have felt in a church like this? What are your thoughts on, because I think for those of us who are in the SDA denomination, this is like totally foreign to us.
So far away from what we have. Well, in our context anyway, I've never seen anything like this.
No.
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. So reach out. Best place to go for all things Burn the Haystack is, of course, burnthehaystack.org. We'd love to hear from you.
That's right. And if you want to help us out, or if this is the first time that you have listened to the podcast, subscribe wherever you are listening and leave us a rating or a review. Helps us to get out there and to get more reach and more followers, more volunteers that we can use and abuse. No, that's not what we do.
Please don't, Jesse.
No. We love our listeners and we love you guys, and we invite lots and lots of feedback and discussion, which you can do by sending us an email, as Josh mentioned, jumping on the Facebook group, also buy our merch. We're coming out with a new album, so we're gonna jump on that Hillsong train. Josh is going to quickly record an album. He's got plenty of time on his hands these days, so he's just going to record an album, then we're going to publish it, and you can buy that on our merch store as well.
Jesse's going to stop talking. Please stop talking. Woo! Yeah! All right, thanks, guys. You're awesome. We love you. This is Josh and Jesse. Out! Bye.